Hello and welcome to ETRealty's special series of Urban Visionaries. For this episode, we have with us Manit Rastogi, founding partner, Morphogenesis. Welcome, Manit.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the last 2 years, pre-COVID and post-COVID now, have you seen any kind of design changes that have happened in the real estate sector? And what are the 3 or 4 major things that you have seen changing in the real estate and architect design side?
So yes, I mean there's been a fundamental and a extreme shift, I would say, in real estate. Now, real estate consists of two parts. There's the residential and then there's the commercial. So first, let's talk about the residential part. What we've seen, so pre-COVID, there was a lot of push towards smaller size apartments. There were the 2 BHKs, the 2.5 BHKs, compact, high density. What we saw post-COVID was a change in that. We saw that that product type particularly, mostly disappeared. And the larger apartments, everyone wanted that extra bedroom, the 3 BHK. So those, the 1.5 became, 3 and 3s and 4s. So we saw that. We also saw a shift towards more open spaces, so larger balconies attached to those residential apartments. And I think a lot of that influence came from that period, so the 2 years of the pandemic. And other than that, we saw a lot of focus and a lot of shift to amenities. So much larger clubs, and the idea really being that can we create self-sustained developments where no one really has to go anywhere, where everything is available for the very young to the very old. And those were the sort of transformational shifts that we saw on the residential side. On the commercial side, we saw a lot of consolidation. And we saw that predominantly the larger funds and the global funds and the larger players in India were the ones who eventually ended up moving ahead with the commercial markets, particularly in the IT and in the ID space. And there again, we've seen a lot of improvement in the wellness factor of these buildings. For example, there's a lot of emphasis now on natural daylight. There's a lot of emphasis on the indoor quality of air. There's a lot of emphasis on incorporating greenery into the building. Again, amenities. So I think overall the pandemic may have been a terrible time, but it's been really good for real estate design.
Post-COVID, most of the builders started going for luxury real estate projects because a lot of land prices cost went up, and they also realized that buyers are demanding larger spaces, which you mentioned correctly. But this also meant that their overall cost went up. And do you see a similar trend that architects are now being asked to design spaces which they have limited space, but they want to show it as a larger space? Or do you think that you are designing projects which are already larger in structure, and these are the trends that will continue to happen in 2 to 3 years?
It's not about the architect or the designer. It's actually about the buyer, and who is really the buyer. And it varies across the country. So if you look at the north, and particularly the NCR, you will find that there were virtually no deliveries for the last decade in the so-called luxury space, and suddenly that vacuum opened up, and that sort of created a big momentum over there. While there were other projects that were in the mid space, which got stuck and now are slowly getting, and so a lot of people had already bought into those. So it's really driven by the buyer. Now, if you move down to places like Mumbai or the Western region, Pune, Chennai, Bangalore, so there the thrust is towards larger apartments, but it's not necessarily, I would say that the market is moved to luxury. There is a spatial requirement as opposed to a luxury requirement. So, the markets vary from, region to region, in different parts. Calcutta is very different. But by and large, yes, the thrust has been to move to larger apartment, but that's all buyer driven. I do not think it's a function of the land prices as much as, FARs have gone up. So if the land price has gone up, so has the FAR, so is the amount that you can build on that land. Construction prices definitely have gone up, and that has, and that's played quite a big role. But I think fundamentally what has happened also is that we were in an economy earlier where, at least the younger generation was own nothing and share everything. And I think what the pandemic did was shift that mindset that, no, we must have a place of our own. And if we are going to have a place of our own, then let's put some serious thought into it. And what is it that should be? I think these are more the factors that are governing the market today.
In the last 2 years, there has been a lot of talk of sustainability also. While the government wants us to be carbon neutral net zero by 2070, they want the construction industry to be focusing and targeting towards this. But as an architect, how do you see the current status of the construction industry? Are we doing enough to move towards the carbon neutrality? Are you seeing enough projects which are looking for sustainability within their own projects, to incorporate sustainability or eco-friendly designs within their own projects? Are you seeing enough demand from residential, commercial, hospitality, all three sides? Do you see enough projects that are being developed across India that are adhering to the sustainable pointers?
So, as an architect, you ask any architect this question, they'll say, no, we're not doing enough. However, I will not say that. You must always look at rate of change. Where were we with sustainability 5 years ago, 5 years before that, and 5 years before that? And what is that rate of change? And then, if you look into the future, where will we be? So, where we are today, I would say as a country, we've done brilliantly. There have been a lot of initiatives by the government. So, if your buildings are rated green, you get additional FSI. In some cities, you get property tax benefits. So, the government is doing. However, those projects, are limited to certain size of projects. But I think, by and large, the government is on the right track for that. Are the developers doing enough? Yes, they are. So I mean, all the projects that we are doing, and we tend to, we do work across the country. And if I look at every single development of ours, right, currently, I would say we have close to about nearly 20 crore square feet of residential under construction. All are green rated. Okay. Now we can argue, are green ratings sufficient to be green? But in terms of rate of change, if I was to look at that same number 5 years ago, I'd say we were about 10% of that. So that's the rate of change. Now, that's exponential growth in green buildings. Earlier, no one used to look at green buildings in residential because there was no value to it in terms of the buyer. The buyer today is now looking at it. And I'm seeing a transformational shift. So sustainability is here to stay. The government supports it, the buyer supports it, the developer supports it. Architects always wanted it. Okay, I mean, our thrust has always been on, how can you do a lot more with a lot less? But that is the kind of country that we are. Our resources are not infinite. We are not yet a developed economy. So we have to learn to, and we have a whole country to build. We just started on that process.
Right. And this commercial real estate part also, but I'd like to add a few points because you mentioned consolidation. A lot of companies, foreign companies have come into India in the last few years and they have established their head offices or branch offices in India, or they have acquired companies, they have tied up with companies. So they have brought in a standard that was from Europe or from US or from other countries, and they want a similar standard in India also. Do you see that this being one of the factors, motivation, that the commercial real estate that is being developed now, commercial spaces that are being developed now are at a certain standard which incorporates the sustainability part as well?
That used to be the case. Okay. What you're referring to may actually backtrack maybe a decade. Because it was at that time where the MNCs were the tenants. Developers, we were all making commercial buildings, and the only reason to make it green was because it was on the checklist of the tenant, and the tenant was a global tenant. So if it was whether it was LEED or whichever one. But today, I think by and large, I can't think of a single commercial building that we are doing, or I can't think of any that is not green rated. The objective is, of course, the fact that there is a tenant at the other end, but I think it's more than that. It's more than that. Companies today, Indian corporates that we work with, developers, have taken, so we work with, say, Godrej or Mahindra or they've taken a pledge at the top level that all our buildings are going to be green rated. That has nothing to do with the fact whether the tenant wants it or not. It's part of the ESG plan of the corporate. So there is a fundamental shift, rate of change. So even in the commercial, even if today, let us say 50% of the tenants wanted green and 50% did not, I don't think it's going to change the equation. I think we as a country today have understood sustainability. We've seen the pandemic. We've seen where we've come from. We've seen the amount of consumption that it's going to take. And if you can be sustainable without spending more. So, what actually our definition of sustainability and morphogenesis, a good green building is one which should cost less to build and should cost lesser to run. Now, if you can achieve those two conditions, then it's a non-brainer. The problem comes when you have to spend more and then have an ROI. That's where the problem. But today, I think as Indian designers, we're doing a phenomenal job. So I really don't see that being the driver.
Because you mentioned this, a lot of builders I have talked to in the last few years, one of the major factors they say because they don't want to go into this green projects is one is because the demand is not that much from the home buyers. Second is the cost of construction to build a green building, according to them, is that it is higher in comparison to a normal standard building that they develop. And the return of interest, because after 5 years they have to transfer it to RWA. Correct. So their return of interest is within the 5 years that they sell. So they don't see the kind of investment return on investment that they are doing for a green building in comparison to that standard building that they will develop. Do you agree with, first as an architect, do you agree with the statement that the cost of construction of developing green project is higher, the overall project, not just one particular building? And do you agree with the point that their return of investment is not that much that they are attracted enough to develop these kind of projects?
Let me answer that in a very simple way. Okay. We are by and large, we are a hot country. Okay. Now, if you make a building which is all glass and faces west, you're going to get a lot of heat. Okay. Now, let us say you want to make this building green. Yes, you will spend a lot more because you'll have to put in very efficient and a lot more air conditioning. And then to make it green, you'll have to have a very efficient system. Efficient systems will cost more. If you take the same building and don't put glass on the west and you put it on the north, now you're starting with a well-designed passive building whose energy requirement is already reduced. Then it doesn't. So the question really of a good green building is that if you start from a bad design point, yes, of course, it'll cost you more to fix it. But if your design is already starting from a point which takes into consideration of where the sun is and another passive means of how the winds blow, if you take that into account, like we used to build, then the differential is not there. So it's simply that. You take something that is broken and try and make it better. You're going to spend a lot more money. You take something that is first time right and then try and improve it, doesn't cost.
Okay, because you are mentioning about designing. As an architect, when you are given a project or when you tie up with a builder for a particular project, how much freedom do you as an architect have to design a building that way you want to, and how much it is dictated by the whoever is the owner of the particular project? And what are the major 2 or 3 challenges that you face in any projects that in general that you look into?
The challenge is not from the developer. Because at the end of the day, who's your, my client is, I work for the developer, but my client is actually the buyer, the end user. The end user determines everything. Like advertising determines news. I was just mentioning that to you earlier. But so the end buyer is the eventual client. In the case of residential, in the case of commercial, of course, the tenant is the end. He's the person or she's the person that will dictate what the developer will do and we'll do. Now, coming to restriction, I think that the maximum restriction that we get is from some of the archaic building laws of our country. Okay, I'll give you a simple example. All our buildings are designed to be mini industries. The amount of power that goes into our buildings, the power backups that we have to provide, the amount of parking that we provide. Our parking to building ratios is now pretty much approaching 1:1. We're building as much underneath the ground as we're building above. And that's because our external infrastructure is not there. I mean, certain countries which have very good public transport infrastructure, you actually have a reverse thing. You can't build more car parking, right? We have a reverse problem. We have a problem that we can't rely on the state for regular water supply, regular power supply. So I think that imposition is very, very high. Now, those are very easily solvable problems. Because if you do district cooling or you do district, at a district level, rather than ask each project to do it on its own, it's very simple. It's the power of the collective. If that's, for example, let's say Gurgaon. Okay, it's a very simple example. I can take Bangalore, Gurgaon, anywhere. Now, if we had a proper system of water supply and sewage disposal and recycling and this, then, we would cut down the cost of buildings by 15-20%. Okay, so I think the restrictions are really coming from a mismatch between our building bylaws, a lack of external infrastructure, and what we are expected to do. it's lesser because of a developer having an imposition on us. Our success is the same. We recently had a project, Godrej Zenith, that launched in, that launched, and they sold 1,000 apartments, 3,000 crores worth in 3 days. Okay, and highly successful. Why? Okay, because we, as a client, as an architect, and of course there are other consultants, so we should not just the two of it. We were only targeting one thing: customer delight, which was what we were all after, and it pays off. So really, that's it. I mean, it's not the ecosystem of designers, contractors, developers. We all want the same thing. We all want to be highly successful. We want to make a profit. We want the project to do well. Okay, we are all businesses at the end of the day, and and everyone has a good conscience because if that project does well, the next one will do even better, right? So the challenges are not there. The challenges are actually external, as much more than internal to the process.
Okay, I will add to this because you are mentioning about urban infrastructure. Every year we see in Bangalore, in Chennai, the flood situation, in Gurgaon, the flood situation, then there are a lot of sewage problems, there are a lot of other problems that happen, there are a lot of disasters that happen. But do you see that it's also obviously the government infrastructure is where the government side of it comes in, but do you see that architects and other plans are also not doing enough when they are master planning the city, the urban planners, and when they are talking to architects and builders within the sectors, that the projects that are being developed, the roads that are being developed, the sewage that is being put in before the projects that come in? Do you think that this is something that is lacking, or what is your take? Why do we see these kind of things happening every year regularly and not improving anything on it?
So it's like this, okay, and I'm glad you brought this up. So we have, every city will have either a city development plan or a master plan, right? Now, and in that there'll be zones, etc. Now, the question really is that how progressive are these documents? Okay? At the end of the day, you are designing for a certain number of people that you're projecting into the future, which means that there's a certain amount of FAR you have calculated for, and therefore a certain population, hence a certain number of cars, schools, etc., roads, all of that. Now, how accurate is that data? Okay, and in my assumption, that data is actually highly inadequate. One, by the analysis for collecting the data was done, say, year one. By the time the data gets collected, processed, and then it goes through the legal system of getting the master plan, you're already too late. You've already surpassed that the population has already increased by 50%. Now, if you look at Indian urbanization, and that's at the core of the issue, right? We are at what, about 30% going to 50%. We're talking about, close to 350, 400 million people moving to cities in the next decade or so. That's the whole population of the US. Okay? And where are these new cities? They're not existing. So that population and thrust, okay? And so what will we do? We'll increase FARs in a city. I don't have a problem with that. But then was the infrastructure planned for that increase in FAR? So it's a sort of a chicken and egg problem that's going on and on and on. So we really have to think beyond a city plan by itself. We have to begin to start thinking about satellite cities, internodal fast speed connections. We have to start thinking about if India is going to urbanize at that rate, which we are, in the next decade or so, I mean, from what it looks like, give or take a black swan event, we are on that trajectory. So I would call that this is a time of emergency planning, to think of India as one nation and think about what kind of infrastructure do we need to move that from that 30% to that 50, 60% of urbanization we think we will get to.
The infrastructure, because another part of this is, okay, so the real estate is very localized. In what works in north will not work in south, and what works in west might not work in the east part. Because you have projects across, what are the things that you see are major pointers which differentiate these regions, and how do you, when we go for a project, how do you work on this, that this is, if we are developing a project in Mumbai, this is how we should do this, and if we are developing a project in Chennai, this is how we should work upon?
Yeah. So the many answers to that. However, I'll pick on two, which are very simple. One, it comes from codal regulations. So, for example, in Bangalore, Bombay, Mumbai, balconies are in FAR. So the tendency is not to give or give very, very tiny balconies. Okay. While, for example, in many other northern states, you get this sort of 6 feet balcony if you have a Versailles. Now that has a fundamental impact on the quality of life you're being able to dispense to the person who's going to live there. The second comes from the culture of the community that you're designing for. And that is a micro market thing. When we design in Ahmedabad, luxury or affordable, the utensil washing has to be done outside the kitchen. There has to be a place outside the entrance door to leave shoes, no matter what you do. If you move to Calcutta, depending on which community that you're designing for, one community may want 100% Vastu. And just 100 meters away, another community may say, no, we're not concerned with Vastu. We want cross ventilation in every room. And that complete. So what it really comes down to is understanding the user. Who are you designing for? Okay. Bangalore, people have a very different lifestyle. Families tend to be more nucleated. North families tend to be more multi-generational. I've always argued this. If you're designing in the north, keep in mind that every single project is an assisted living project, but at least 30% of those apartments will have an elder person living there. So put a toilet that suits universal ability for with all the apartments. So it's really understanding the community you're designing for and understanding the building bylaws and how you can get the two to marry to each other.
The infrastructure problem that we were discussing before, do you think integrated township, this is a concept that has been there for a decade and for more than a decade now, but that has not picked up much. Very few builders which have the kind of pocket to develop this kind of integrated townships have brought in these townships in few spaces, and that has also been not very successful, is what we have seen. You may differ to it, but do you think this can be a solution to the infrastructure problem that cities faces? The integrated township, developing them closer to the main cities, having all the infrastructure and be developed by the builder or the private companies, and then adding it to the city. So the city infrastructure.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes. Integrated townships, integrated town planning, integrated development is a fantastic way to solve that problem. And I've seen some fail and I've seen some succeed highly. We did a 400-acre township in West Bengal called Uttarayan. This was for Ambuja. And it's been now, 20 years? And the township is highly successful. Okay, all the water is recycled. There's a sewage treatment plant which is natural, and even if you go there today, okay, and of course property prices have shot up because it's done so well, and it's right outside that is the city of Siliguri, where infrastructure is crumbling, and here it's flourishing. So the answer is yes. However, the problem with integrated townships arises from the fact that to find contiguous land, okay, in and around cities, it's a tremendous issue. So what will happen? The state will get involved. When they start acquiring land, then they'll have to, and an integrated township begins at 100 acres. It's not at 20 acres. It's not at 10 acres. It's 100, 200, 500 acres. That's the, parcel sizing we're talking about. So that process is complicated. The other process now they're trying is a land pooling strategy, where different people can come together, put their land together, and then, the 30-40% is taken away towards roads, etc., whatever. But, I guess in a nation where, we got our freedom by not cooperating, I think I think some of that still lingers on. So to get people together, Ahmedabad and Gujarat has been very successful with land pooling. But that's a model. But to answer the question, integrated townships is a great idea.
Okay. Lot of buildings even in NCR or in Chennai or in other cities have been, so age of building is around 50, 60, 80 years or more, but a lot of buildings we are seeing are crumbling or being destroyed, demolished within few years of development or within 10, 20 years, and the cracks appears. A lot of buildings in India and North without earthquake or without any natural calamities, the construction quality is not that good. As an architect, do you think that one, architects are responsible for this? Second, do you think overall why is it that these buildings which are supposed to last 50, 60, 80 years are crumbling in a very initial stage of their life cycle? And when you develop project, you design a project, you see all the materials and see everything, then you vision a project will last for this many years. What after, is it because that when you hand over it to RWA that the maintenance is not that good that this happens, or is there any other particular reason?
So number one, lack of maintenance will not bring a building to a point where it starts crumbling. It may not look that it's but it's not going to have any. It should not have any issues where it needs to be brought down. So that is not really the problem. The real problem, okay, it comes from the fact that in our law, there is no accountability. Okay, so as an architect, I'm licensed. Okay, but if there's a structural failure, okay, now let us assume that that there are cracks in the building. Now that cracks in the building can come from what? It's a structural failure. Okay. Now for that there is a structural engineer who designed it. Now maybe the design was okay. Then there's a contractor who built it. Maybe there was a flaw in the design, or maybe there wasn't. Maybe the contractor did not use the proper material. However, on top of the contractor is the project manager who's supposed to oversee that construction, and the material may have got supplied directly by the say the developer. Where does accountability sit? Okay, so normally the law would pick up the developer and take him to jail. Now the developer has hired a project manager, has hired a contractor, has hired an architect, has hired a structural engineer, and all the others. The developer essentially is a manager, is a business manager. Now, if the building cracks, how is the developer responsible unless he was doing the construction in-house? And I think the law is very unclear. So the project managers are not certified in India. Architects are, structural engineers are. Contractors have a license, but they're not. Yeah. So, so that's on one side. There's another problem. Okay. So unless we fix the RACI, who's responsible, accountable, who's consulted, who's informed. And that matrix is very, very clear that if a building fails, what is the matrix of accountability and responsibility of all the people who are involved? Okay. So we need that law. We need that clarity. Second part is that maybe that building is not ready to be crumbled. It just visually is looking like that. And the prices have gone up double and the FAR is tripled. So it's far more efficient financially to pull it down and rebuild.
Yes. But that is very rare. But a lot of
no, it's not actually. You'd be surprised.
Okay. The other side of it now, one is whenever we talk to architects or when we talk to builders, every city used to have their own culture. Lucknow, Jaipur, or in Bangalore, or Orissa, Bhubaneswar, any city you look at it, they used to have their own culture, they used to have their own design. But now the commercial or residential buildings that are being developed by the architects, they look the same. In every city that you go to, their design are almost the same. You will not be able to differentiate that this is a city in Rajasthan or this is a city in East.
Yep.
Is it the architects have become lazy and they are designing which is more easier to develop and is cost friendly, and the designing part of it to bring in the culture, bringing the aesthetics of that particular city, how much do you think architects are responsible to bring 100%. In this design, and why is it not happening?
Okay, so I'll answer that question. Okay, first I'll tell you what every architect should, what we do. So we copyrighted a design philosophy in 2019 called SOUL. Sustainability, S. O is optimization, U is uniqueness, and L is livability. Objective of sustainability is that through passive design, your building should consume 50% lesser energy and water. Okay, prior to making it green. That's just good design, sustainability. Optimization is how do you design a building which uses lesser steel, lesser cement, so you have a price point that you have to build at. The question really is that how do you optimize for that? Uniqueness is that each building must look different. Why should it look different? Because if you are designing responsive to climate, responsive to a client's brand. Okay, so when we said for design for various corporates, we have to see what their culture and their brand carries. You know, a Trump Tower is very, very different from maybe another corporate, and they both carry their brands. Okay, so we have to be responsive to that, and no two brands are identical. I mean, look down the road. The cars look far more different that are mass manufactured than the houses on that road, because they follow a certain design philosophy. So, if you're looking at the client's brand, if you're looking at the context, and if you're looking at the climate, how can every building? So I can understand you're building for the same client next to each other with a similar target segment. They may be similar, but I completely fail to understand how this is happening. So the question that you asked me, are architects lazy? I wouldn't use the term lazy, but I do think that there is a certain commoditization of architecture and design that is taking place in India naturally. A lot of it comes from the fact that the fee structures are I think incorrectly configured. So a lot of the fee structures in real estate are configured around rupees per square foot. Okay, I think there is no element of performance. There is no element of success, of failure, of it's like as if you were a tile layer. You pay a tile layer X rupees per square foot to lay tiles, and then you pay the architects or the structural engineers X rupees per square foot, and that X rupees keeps fighting amongst each other. So that commoditization is a fundamental problem. I mean, and the big problem is also the government. Their procurement methodology is L1. Now, they may do this 70-30 or whatever, but if you do a 70-30, 70% technical, 30% on fee, on 30% of fee, you do the math. The person who quotes half the fee will take the job, irrespective of what happens with the 70. So there is a lot of change that needs to come there too. I wouldn't say the problem is laziness. Okay, the problem is really that.
Last question is, one advice that you give to young architects, one suggestion that you want to give to the government, and one advice or suggestion you want to give to the real estate builders.
So, my advice to the government, I'll start from there. That's where the cookie crumbles. Okay, my advice to the government would be is that look at India as one country and build a master plan of urbanization for the entire country, an ecological master plan that takes into account, and I'll give a simple example. All the northern belt is a high earthquake zone, and it's very dense because the minerals came from the mountain, and that's why there was a lot of farming. They turned into cities. The coastal regions are very susceptible to natural disasters because of the oceans while the center of India is quite empty. Okay, which is actually the nicest place to densify and redevelop. So we need to get out of the state structure and start thinking about India as one integrated township. Yeah, so build a 100-year plan, break it to 50, 20, 10, 5, 1. And so that we can at least embark on that path. If you are going to be a developed nation, let's look at it with a holistic mindset. And then build laws around it, then build rules and regulations around it. Not today FAR 2, tomorrow FAR 3, then buy FAR on TDR, then, because that's half-assed. You can't plan long-term like that. So that would be my advice to them. And of course, along with that, change your procurement strategy of the L1. Merit should be more important. To Indian developers, I think they have made a fundamental transformation from the last decade to where we are today. A lot is thankful to the government for that, RERA, GST, etc. But I think what the developers really need right now is to be recognized as an industry. Our entire space is not recognized as an industry. That would be even more transformative. It would also push real estate development to start operating as once you become an industry, then you also start cooperating better, you start working better. But my advice to them would be, on the rate of change that I have seen, keep at it. Okay, I really don't see, I would have told you 100 items a decade ago. But so much has changed that if we just continue on this path, we would be fine. To students of architecture.
Thank you, Manit, for joining us. It was great listening to your views. Thank you everyone and keep watching ETRealty.